Welcome back, Muses. It is freaking 2026. All right, there's a lot of information on this, but I want to start this whole series with just a bit of a timeline so that I can give you an idea of how far back this goes. So let's check that out because it's going to be lengthy in several episodes. Where was the beginning of the witch trials? Like, not just ours, but as a whole. There is no way to truly go back and trace the beginning, of course, but we can go back to the early recorded times. So let's start with that. So the earliest and oldest recorded laws regarding witchcraft come from the ancient Near East. First, we have the Code of Hammurabi, circa 1750 BCE.
What is it with the hammer?
Well, I thought the same thing because as you see the spelling, I thought, surely that's not hammer. Of course, I have to look up the pronunciation to make sure that it is or isn't. And I was like, I'll be damned. So
maybe whacking them witches with hammers.
I'm kind of curious if that's where he got that.
Maybe because he was a douche canoe. Okay.
He was a big, giant dildo of a douche canoe.
He was the heir to the Massengill fortune.
King, top dog.
King douche.
We still don't like Henrik Kramer. So
we sure don't.
We're never gonna. And you'll learn throughout this little series. Well, it's not a little series, it's an entire month's worth of series. And then some. I don't know how many months this is going to be fair, but whatever. You'll learn why. It'll really sink in why we don't like him. So, anywho, this Babylonian law code includes one of the first known trials for sorcery. It used the ordeal by water. The accused was thrown into the river. If they drowned, they were guilty. If the river, quote, spared them, they were innocent. Then we have the Hebrew Bible, circa 700 BCE. The famous command in Exodus 22:18, thou shalt not suffer a witch to live, proved the legal and religious foundation for trials for the next 2,000 years. So next up we have the first diabolic witch trials in the Middle Ages. The classic witch trials where people were accused of making a pact with the devil, and it didn't begin until the late Middle Ages. So that's kind of where we're going to be starting out. So the very first modern witch trial was that of a woman in Ireland, an isolated accusal and trial, but this one woman essentially sparked the modern day trials, and I can't not put her in first because this is basically what leads us to where we technically began. So as far as recorded trials, she was the first, so I will tell her story. Alice Kittler was a wealthy noblewoman in 14th century Kilkenny, Ireland, and is famously known as the first person in the country to be condemned for witchcraft. Her life was marked by significant financial success and a series of high-profile marriages that ultimately led to her downfall. She was born around 1260 or 1280 to a wealthy Norman or Flemish family. Alice inherited her father's banking business and properties. She was married 4 times, and the mysterious deaths of her husbands, coupled with the vast accumulation of well-fueled local resentment. Her husbands, William Outlaw was her first husband. He was a banker. Adam.
How you gonna be a banker and your last name is Outlaw? That is
kind of glorious.
Lovely. And I am here for all of the things that you have said so far.
Yes, I had never heard of her. This is one of the things that really threw me in because I had never heard this name. So her second husband, Adam LeBlond, he was also a banker. And then there was Richard DeVale, her third husband. He was a wealthy landlord. And then there was Sir John Lepoer, her husband, whose illness in 1323 sparked the final accusations. So In 1324, her stepchildren from previous marriages accused her of using sorcery and poison to kill their fathers and favor her own son, William Outlaw Jr.
I'm sorry, what? Where'd the sorcery come in?
I don't know.
Okay.
1324 of it all, I guess.
I reckon.
Right. I don't know. So the Bishop of Ossory, Richard de la Drede, spearheaded the prosecution, bringing formal charges against her, including heresy, which is denying Christ and the church, demonic sacrifice, offering animals to a demon lover known as Robert Artisan or Son of Art, sorcery, using potions made of the skull of a thief to manipulate or kill.
Is that the definition of sorcery?
I don't think specifically that it is.
Potion made in the skull of a thief. Okay. Okay.
Where'd you get that?
Who decided that? And maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but did she... Okay, they're bringing formal charges against her for heresy.
Right.
Did she actually deny Christ?
Not that I could find, no.
You couldn't find... Okay. Because we just be blaming bitches. It's fine. I'm going to look that up.
Never changed, did it?
No, sure didn't.
No. One of her other charges was also consorting with an incubus, claiming she had a sexual relationship with a demon that appeared as a black dog or cat. Unlike those accused alongside her, Alice used her political connections and wealth to avoid execution. After a period of imprisonment and a complex legal battle between church and secular authorities around 1324, Alice fled Ireland, likely heading to England or Flanders. Her former brother-in-law, the Chancellor of Ireland, reportedly helped organize her escape. While Alice escaped, her maidservant, Petronilla de Meath, was not as lucky. Petronilla was tortured until she confessed to being Alice's accomplice and was burned at the stake on November 3rd, 1324, the very first person in Ireland to be executed for heresy that's on record. There are no historical records of Alice after her escape. Her exact date and place of death remain unknown, though she is generally believed to have lived out her remaining years in obscurity. Today, her former residence in Kilkenny, Kittler's Inn, still stands and operates as a popular pub and restaurant. So that's the beginning. That's where we started. So her maidservant was the first person on record to be burned at the stake. And
just for being associated with her?
For being an accomplice, but it doesn't even say exactly to what. So...
P.S. There is no definition of sorcery in the Bible or the Webster's that says that it is using potions made in the skull of a thief.
Kind of assume.
I was like, that's new.
But you gotta remember, too, I mean, how many years later was it that stupid ass wrote that dumbass book? He just made shit up. Apparently they were doing it back then, too. So, yeah, that's our first person. So now we are going to move on to the big ones. And like I said, I'm just doing a timeline for right now. That's not what this episode is even about. I just wanted to kind of lay it out so that you can kind of get an idea of where this started and all of that. So the Valais witch trials, which were from 1428 to 1434, taking place in southern Switzerland. These are often cited by historians as the first systematic mass witch hunts in Europe. Over 300 people were executed after being accused of diabolism or worshiping the devil. So then we have the trial of Eleanor Cobham in 1441, a high-profile case in England where the Duchess of Gloucester was accused of using witchcraft to kill King Henry VI. And last was the first trials in the American colonies, which are what are most spoken about, which honestly baffles me because we were very, very mild. But because this is home for us, I decided to begin here. While the Salem trials are the most famous, there are far worse, and they were far from the first ones in America. So let me get started on naming those who suffered the accusations and executions. Some will have more info than others. I will give their names, dates, locations, and the outcomes of their accusations and trials, but some of them I felt needed just a little more. All right, so let's get started with the early colonial period, which was pre-Salem in 1626 to 1646. This began on September the 11th, 1626. Joan or Jane Wright of Surrey County, then Jamestown, Virginia, and she was acquitted. The first recorded accusation in English North America, a midwife, of course, accused of causing a child's death, but records of a sentence do not exist. A little about Joan, though. She was a midwife, as I said, and a cunning woman or practitioner of folk magic. Her neighbors accused her of causing the death of a newborn, bewitching butter churns, and predicting the deaths of several people. Unlike the later trials in New England, the Virginia court was relatively skeptical, and Joan was acquitted, and she continued to live in the colony for many years. So from there, we move on to 1638. Jane Hawkins and Anne Hutchinson in Boston, Massachusetts. They were banished, and their story is pretty interesting, so I had to share some of that. They were both midwives, and Jane was attending to Mary Dyer during a difficult stillborn deformed birth. Jane was banished for practicing medicine and challenging religious norms as a woman and heresy. Anne was called in to assist and hold religious rites. Anne was banished for holding unauthorized scripture meetings and claiming direct revelation from God, challenging male religious authority and heresy. And here is a little about Jane and Anne. The banishment of Jane Hawkins and Anne Hutchinson from the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1638 was a landmark event in American colonial history. While Hutchinson is the more famous figure, the two were closely linked by a scandalous medical and religious event that the Puritan leadership used to justify their, quote, purging of the colony. Jane Hawkins was a midwife and close friend of Hutchinson. She was banished for two reasons: her association with Hutchinson's religious views and her role as a healer. Governor John Winthrop accused her of using magic or witchcraft, citing her use of oil of mandrake and other herbs to help women conceive. Anne Hutchinson was an intellectual and religious leader who held popular weekly meetings in her home. She preached a covenant of grace, arguing that salvation was a gift from God, not something earned through works or outer behavior and church obedience. The male leadership viewed her as a threat to their authority, of course, especially because she taught men as well as women. So in March 1638, she was convicted of heresy and sedition after claiming she received direct revelations from God. The catalyst for Jane's banishment was her role as a midwife for Mary Dyer, another Hutchinson supporter, during the traumatic stillbirth. The child was born with severe deformities. When Winthrop found out, he had the body exhumed and used the monstrous appearance of the child as proof that the mother's and midwives' religious views were a perversion of nature and a sign of God's wrath. Both women were forced to leave Boston in the spring of 1638. They traveled south to what is now Rhode Island, a colony founded on the principle of religious freedom, which I have, of course, throughout all of this, have learned the Quakers basically were the ones who they went to. There was a whole thing with the Puritans and Quakers. If you don't know, it's basically the Quakers believed in freedom of religion based on Christianity, but not as to the word as the Puritans. So a lot of people, when they fled the Puritans, that's where they went, was to the Quakers. So Jane and her husband Richard also settled in Portsmouth, Rhode Island. She continued to serve as a midwife and a healer in the new colony, where her skills were more appreciated. In 1641, Jane attempted to return to Boston to visit her children who lived there still. The Massachusetts authorities immediately caught her and banished her a second time, threatening her with severe whipping or imprisonment if she ever stepped foot in the colony again. Jane is often cited by historians as one of the first women in America to be formally accused of witchcraft, decades before Salem's trials. She survived the accusations and lived out her life in Portsmouth, dying around 1656. Her descendants became prominent members of the Rhode Island and New York communities. Anne Hutchinson and her family helped establish the settlement of Pocasset, now Portsmouth in Rhode Island. She remained a spiritual leader and a thorn in the side of Massachusetts authorities who continued to harass her from afar. After her husband William died in 1642, Anne feared Massachusetts would annex Rhode Island. To escape their reach, she moved her family to the Dutch territory of New Netherland, specifically near the Pelham Bay area of what is now the Bronx, New York. In 1643, Hutchinson and most of her children were killed by Sewanoi warriors during Kieft's War, a conflict between the Dutch and the local tribes. Only one daughter, Susanna, survived. When the news reached Boston, the Puritan leaders famously celebrated it as God's final judgment on her. So that is the first years. So what are you thinking so far?
I mean, I think men do be afraid of powerful women. Because I wonder if, and I know we discussed this before, would this have all gone down the way it did had some of these midwives been male doctors instead?
Well, yeah, and that's always the question. But at the same time, I didn't see them jumping to do that for a living.
Men?
You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah. I guess that's a good point.
Midwives or anything really to do with women's health. So,
well, good, since they don't have, they can't even find parts of our bodies.
Yeah. But yeah, again, we had this part of this discussion because before we were talking about, what the hell were we supposed to do as females? Because we didn't have male doctors, but female doctors weren't allowed. So it's like, screw us either way. We get sick and die, period. We have babies on our own, I guess, and just whatever. It's fine. So I don't know. I never really understood exactly what we were supposed to do.
At what point someone's going to realize the role that women need to play in the continuation of the human race.
Because they obviously just really didn't think of that.
No, sure did not.
No. I mean, that's literally 3 people so far.
But they were interesting.
Very. I really wish that I could throw in more already. Like, for this one. Next episode is going to be lengthy. I went with just the very first of it, just to kind of dangle a little teaser.
A little carrot in front of our noses.
Yeah. So this one's the shortest of the 4 episodes, just so you know.
Well, thank you, because I liked it.
Good. I'm glad. I'm excited about it. So now you're going to tell us things.
This is the Hempfield Tunnel, and it's known locally as Tunnel Green. It was constructed in the mid-1850s during the expansion of the Hempfield Railroad to support freight and passenger movement between Wheeling, West Virginia, and Washington, PA. It was used by travelers as a shortcut from one part of the city to the other, so you could walk from one part of the city to the other through the tunnel. And maybe people drove their cars through there. I don't know, because it is in a flat spot where you could have done that, I think. Anyway, I think I saw it in a movie once. It is located along what is now the Wheeling Heritage Trail in Wheeling. It is 448 feet in length and was rebuilt in 1904. The rebuild was due to some substantial deterioration, which required some major reconstruction. A commemorative plaque now stands near the tunnel with the names of the individuals who were involved in the process of the reconstruction. The nickname Tunnel Green emerged after it was bypassed when CSX abandoned the Wheeling-Pittsburgh subdivision west of Washington in 1987 and it became overgrown. The park press explained it was dubbed Tunnel Green because of its grass-like and overgrown look. Bypassed in this context means that the Hempfield line was abandoned rather than rerouted. So the bypass, it was an operational thing and not a structural thing. There's another word that gets used here, and I've never seen this. It's called daylighted, and that's when they take the top of it off and they open it. So that way,
I've never heard of that.
I didn't even know it was a thing until I was looking into this, and I was like, oh.
Interesting.
And I couldn't find any that we had around anywhere.
That's what I was going to say.
That had been, yeah, but it's just
I
they
don't
would
think I've
do
ever
that
seen
to
it.
allow larger
Yeah,
trade, I
that makes
guess,
sense.
larger things to pass through it.
Okay. Yeah.
Via train. So yeah, that's called daylighted, and it means that the top is open, so then there's an open air cut rather than an enclosed passage. So now that you have a brief history of the tunnel, I want to get into the haunting of it all. For starters, the Hempfield Tunnel was built directly beneath the Peninsula Cemetery.
Oh, that's not good. Okay, carry on.
Yeah, it's not good. It was built over the remains of the cemetery, which was moved to make way for the railroad construction. By the way, Wheeling has a disgustingly wild amount of cemetery relocation things going on there.
Really?
Like, yes, like it's a lot. Like, I was reading this one thing that said that somebody had bought this piece of land and was building their new house, and they kept finding bone fragments and, pieces of coffins, and because they moved the stones. Like the cemetery in front of Dad's,
Oh, yeah.
where the two stones are still there because we can't find the family, well, whoever
Well,
moved the cemetery.
right.
They can just rest right there, stones and all, as far as we're concerned.
Right. They're fine.
But there's still people there if they aren't floating down the canal somewhere.
I mean,
And that's
yeah.
where we used to live, was right over top of that. Whenever I was little, that's where our trailer sat.
Yes, that's right. You
Mhm.
showed me.
Yep.
I think that moving cemeteries is just the most wild and crazy, unnecessary thing ever to exist. Like, leave them alone. Build your
Like,
shit somewhere else.
you don't need to cut an interstate through a cemetery.
You really
Build
don't.
over it.
Yeah,
Just go around
right.
it.
Right. I just don't understand it.
And this is another reason why I do not wish to be buried.
Right.
At
That's
some point,
understandable.
no one cares.
Right. All of your people are going to be gone. So it's like,
Yes.
then what? Yeah, I understand that.
So anyway, if you ever are bored and want to look something up. Okay, on Monday morning, July 19th, 1869, the Wheeling Daily Intelligencer published a now famous ghost report on page 4. Starting in column 4, an appalling mystery, the tunnel haunted, the ghost of a murdered man appears. Now, I am going to read for you this whole entire article because it is 1, wild, 2, fun for reading, and 3, like the best and only description I could find of what happened.
Yeah.
To decide that it was haunted, except for it gets really confusing, and I can't find answers for you if you're going to have the questions that I had.
Okay.
Since the last annual visit of the East Wheeling spirit, no spooks have walked above ground in the vicinity for years, and the minds of our citizens had begun to run in the even tenor of their ways on this question, some even being so skeptical as to doubt the very presence of the spirits of dead men on this terrestrial ball. I have no idea what they're talking about an annual visit from the East Wheeling spirit. I have not found anything that said anything about any other time that a spirit had came to anyone. So I'm very confused with that line. But they do be writing some wild words up in these articles.
First of all, terrestrial ball is glorious. I'll just throw that out there because
yeah, that just meant Earth.
For real.
Right. It's just like, what?
That's a beautiful. I'm gonna start calling it that.
I love it.
So there's that. But yeah, I don't know. I'm pretty confused, and I assumed when you read it all there that was going to be the question, was what spirit.
Correct. Indeed,
Yeah.
what spirit? Because I don't
Yeah.
know, because this one
Good
doesn't happen
question.
at that time.
Great.
They be throwing out words.
Yeah.
This was
Okay.
really fun to try to figure out what it was saying on the very little tiny print, too, of that little newspaper. But I got it. The frightful revelations of a party who were eyewitnesses of the scene we are about to describe dispelled those dreams of security and caused the hearts of many to quake and their guilty consciences to tremble. The witnesses themselves have been in such a state of terror and dismay since the occurrence that it has been with great difficulty that we could gather the real facts in the case. Their rolling eyes and chattering teeth, their ghastly countenances, giving evidence of the truth of their asseverations, but preventing a connected repetition of the events as they occurred. What? I don't even
I
know.
mean, damn.
So the party that this happened to remember, this is something that happens at a tunnel, and
Right.
they're so scared by it that they just are have ghastly countenances. The
That's
disconnected symptoms and ejaculations of horror, which have been repeated as coming from
I beg your finest pardon.
Let me read that again.
Yeah, please. By all means. I need to hear it one more time.
The disconnected sentences and ejaculations of horror, which have been repeated as coming from their blanched and quivering lips, we feel convinced have altered and exaggerated, so that the accounts which prevailed yesterday in the city were totally incorrect. In fact, were garbled versions of the affair.
Who wrote this?
I can't even give anyone credit because it didn't say.
Listen, I need, if you're out there, whoever wrote this, get a hold of me.
Again, with this being confusing, they were talking about something that happened a year ago, and then they're talking about how it just happened, and they're so, what was the word?
Great.
And then they say something about the thing that happened yesterday, and then
Right.
it being totally incorrect. So I'm very confused about this whole
Yeah.
situation. I pretty much just left that part in because, I mean,
For
the
that,
words for entertainment, your face
I mean,
was both horrified and offended. All right, on to the next part of the article.
okay.
The location. The tunnel of the Hempfield Railroad has long been notorious as the scene of some of the most horrible murders which have been chronicled in the annals of our newspaper and in the criminal records of our country. Now, for the record, I was unable to find any more horrible murders that happened at this tunnel, except for the one I'm eventually going to get to.
But there were so many.
There were the most.
Okay.
Its situation is well known to most of our readers, but for the enlightenment of those who have not visited it, we will give a brief description which the new interest awakened by the events of Thursday will sanction.
Which Thursday?
I don't know.
Okay.
Why are these people saying all these words? The tunnel enters the hillside at a distance of about 40 feet from the bridge over Wheeling Creek, behind the hill which forms the background to our thriving and prosperous city. It immediately enters a bed of rock and coal, which, if the darkness occasioned by the exclusion of the sun's rays were not sufficient to render it gloomy and dismal, would of itself have the effect. So it don't get no sun.
Yeah. It
It is me.
sounds glorious.
It is me. I
I
mean,
bet.
I would love it. Its sides and ceiling are covered with dampness and moisture. Directly overhead is situated the peninsula cemetery, so that the green and poisonous slime which oozes from the fissures and crevices in the overhanging rocks, with but little effort of the imagination, may be attributed to the graves and coffins of the dead who lie mouldering above. At the mouth of the tunnel is a sequestered spot known as Curie's Hole. Its name is significant as its record shows it to be the watery grave of many poor fellows. Also couldn't find anything about that. There probably is. I could have been looking in the wrong place. In the memory of many of our readers, the history of Schaefer, the bloodthirsty and brutal murderer who expiated his crimes on the scaffold at Parkersburg, is still fresh. The slaughter of one of his victims took place in the tunnel, is well known, and is supposed to have immediate reference to the appearance of the ghost last week. The murdered man entered the tunnel when he was attacked by Schaefer with a hatchet. Unarmed and inoffensive, the victim was dealt a ferocious blow on the temple. Holding his supplicating hands before his face, he received the second blow upon his arms and fingers. The deed having been accomplished, the victim was dragged and concealed in a culvert near the east mouth of the tunnel, where it was afterwards discovered. Other deeds of this kind are too well known to bear repetition, so it has been an unceasing wonder that the scene of so many horrible crimes has not been continually haunted by the spirit of the murdered men. The place is therefore a most fitting one for the scene which transpired on Thursday. So what it said, and I am going to explain this, it was just, this article was so wild, I just had to. And I had to make you enjoy it with me.
Bonkers.
I promise not to
Okay.
continuously read articles.
But,
Here's
like-
what we know so far.
There's
There's a haunted tunnel.
There's a haunted tunnel.
And unfortunately, a man lost his life there. We know that for certain. But it's trying to say that all these other things, yes, and it was on a Thursday, apparently. I might have that later on.
Yeah.
But what happened, what they saw, happened on a Thursday.
Right.
So let me just try to get through this. Whew.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
The next section is called Let the Dead Rest, and may I say this is my favorite section. Thursday evening, about 6 o'clock, a party of 4 men were proceeding through the tunnel on their way to the country beyond. Having spent the day in wheeling and imbibed the usual amount of fusel oil, they were rather hilarious than otherwise, though none of them were sufficiently under the influence of liquor to be unable to accurately perceive anything that transpired.
Listen. I can't.
I love this section.
Like, I thought the other one was golden, but
I know, it just
wow.
it gets progressively better, but this is the section. Mhm.
Okay.
So they were drunk, but
Obviously
not drunk
enough, apparently.
Right.
Right.
The subject of reappearance of spirits after death had been mooted, but was scoffed and laughed at more in a tone of bravado than real conviction. The topic was still under consideration while they were in the tunnel, but no sooner had they reached the point where the light from the outer world becomes dim and obscure than an ominous silence fell upon all, and every one of them. I don't know why that sentence is like that, but that's
Every
how it
one of
is.
them
All
what?
and every one of them.
Oh,
Why we just wouldn't say that. Y'all was quiet. Everybody noticed it, and everybody got real quiet. The darkness of the cavern had settled into an appalling gloom, but still they held their way. Soon groans and supplications for mercy fell upon their startled ears. The usual cavernous echo was doubly apparent, as the tone of the voice was unnatural and sepulchral. The men stood transfixed with horror and fright. The atmosphere was close and stilling. All at once, issuing from the solid rock which forms the ceiling directly over the spot where the murderer slaughtered his victim, a ghastly form appeared. All around, as we have said, was impenetrable darkness, but the spectre itself was clearly visible as the noonday. It descended feet first till it reached a place about equidistant from the floor and ceiling of the tunnel, where it stopped and remained. So it was floating midair,
yes.
in the center of the tunnel.
Correct.
Dead center. Where it remained for a few seconds, although covered with the slime and earth of the grave, the features of the ghastly spectre were distinctly visible, clad in the habiliments of the tomb. Its appearance was horrible in the extreme, with one arm extended and the bloody fingers of the hand hanging half severed from their stems. With the forefinger of the other hand, it pointed to a gaping wound in its temple. The wound seemed fresh, but the drops of blood seemed clotted and stood out in bold relief on the face of the ill-starred wretch. Without a movement of the lips, a voice apparently issuing from the throat of the ghost exclaimed in a tone so unnatural as to be indescribable, "Let the dead rest!" The horror-stricken witnesses of this appalling spectacle rushed from the scene. At the mouth of the tunnel, they met their parties, whose credulity was not sufficient to believe the story of the witnesses. They therefore obtained a lantern and returned to the spot where the apparition was first seen. They were not long waiting when the spirit in the same place repeated the words he had before used in, if possible, a more horrifying tone, and glided rapidly through the air toward the western mouth of the tunnel. The individuals thus made sure of the authenticity of the apparition were deprived of the power of speech for some hours, and even after the intervention of days, their fearful recollections are so vivid as to render them almost afraid of speaking on the subject. So it was Thursday, but it's been days.
Yeah. Is it
since these people could speak.
the next Thursday?
Then it comes up and says a second appearance. This is the final section of the newspaper article that I found.
Okay.
Yeah, it's called Thursday last. The persons who witnessed this appalling spectacle in the tunnel being men of respectful and truthful characters, their statements created a widespread and profound sensation in the eastern part of the city where they reside. This was intensified by facts which were disclosed yesterday morning by a gentleman who lived a couple of miles east of the city, and which are related as follows. He was coming into the city afoot by way of the railroad late in the evening and was approaching the tunnel from the east, and had noticed a couple of persons walking about 100 yards ahead. He was a short distance this side of the schoolhouse, walking on the track and looking down to guard his steps, when he suddenly felt a strange shiver and sensation of horror, and looking up saw a man standing a few yards ahead directly over the stone culvert, where Ulrich's body was hidden. We'll get to that. His arms were held up above his head as if guarding against apprehended blows, and the blood was streaming down his face and neck. There was an awful stony glare in his eyes, which rooted the beholder to the ground. His first thought was that it was one of the men who had been walking ahead of him who had been assaulted by the other, but before he had time to follow out the thought, he glanced past the horrid spectacle and saw the two men just about to pass into the tunnel. At that instant, the man, specter, or whatever it was, vanished and was nowhere to be seen. Utterly confounded, the frightened and horror-stricken beholder stood gazing at the vacant air, trying to comprehend what he had seen. In a moment or two, he had recovered sufficiently to think connectedly. He looked carefully around. Nothing whatever was to be seen, though it was still light enough to see objects with perfect distinctness. He says he thought at one moment of running forward and telling the men who were ahead and asking them if they had seen anything, but he reflected that, of course, the apparition was not there when they passed, and remembered that he had been looking forward over the very spot where it stood, in the alternations between looking ahead and down at the tracks. Besides, he felt sure he would be ridiculed and called a fool for his fright. He found it impossible, however, to go forward over the spot, and turning about, and returned home, we judge with a great deal of precipitancy. Yesterday morning, he came into the city by the pike, and hearing of the appearance in the tunnel, told one or two friends in confidence what he had witnessed. He is an intelligent person and not given to credulity, but he expresses himself unable to explain the mystery. His account of the appearance of the apparition corresponds substantially with that of the murdered man Ulrich. We're gonna get to that, I promise. Since these terrifying events have been made public, hints are now thrown out that this is not the first time blood-chilling sights have been seen and strange sounds heard in and about the tunnel. Well, it said at the beginning of the article that this happened constantly and that place was horrible for murder and crime, correct?
Right. Yeah. That was its starter. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Still very confused why I still can't find any articles about murders that happened other than this one.
Yeah.
Generally about dark in the evening, but at least once in the middle of the day. Many dark rumors are afloat that don't seem worth repeating. We give the leading circumstances as they are related to us and leave our readers to judge for themselves of their probability. Ma'am, that is how the article ends. Would you now like to get to the part where I explain the murder?
Yeah.
I'm probably going to say this wrong, and I'm sorry. Alois, and it's Alois, but also might be spelled Aloys, Ulrich, a German immigrant living in Wheeling, West Virginia. I wasn't able to find a whole lot of information about him other than he was a German immigrant living in Wheeling when this happened. On June 29th, 1867, Ulrich's body was found hidden in a culvert near the east mouth of the tunnel. His murder went unsolved until his murderer wrote out a confession sometime after he was caught in January of 1868. And he was caught when he tried and failed to murder a man named John White in his coal company office. The murderer, Joseph Eisele, I think is how you say that, Eisele, had entered White's office on Juliana Street in Parkersburg at around 8 p.m. to pay a coal debt. When White sat down to write a receipt for the payment, Eisele pulled out a hatchet and began beating White. Eisele's blows came in such an awkward manner that White was able to grab the hatchet. When he realized he was about to be overcome, Eisele ran into the street where he was caught and subdued. Now, according to another article I read that I will not read you the whole thing of, it was on a site called West Virginia Haunts and Legends. Eisele had taken 10 days to arrange for a close friend by the name of Alois Ulrich, a new immigrant, to join him in work in Wheeling. Ulrich was murdered inside Hempfield Tunnel, killed with blows to his temple, arms, and fingers. Think back to that apparition.
Right, yeah.
Then he was dragged to the far end and concealed in a culvert near the east mouth of the tunnel. His date of death was estimated as June 29th, 1867. Ulrich was not his first and only murder. Before being executed, Eisele wrote a book titled Life and Crimes of Joseph Eisele, alias John Schaefer, the Parkersburg murderer, published for the benefit of his wife and child. That was the title of the book. The book described his murder spree and himself in great detail. You may have also heard him referred to as the Hatchet Slayer. So though the tunnel was said to have had a history of violence, which I was unable to find, given the description of the apparition, it is assumed that it is Ulrich who haunts the tunnel.
I mean, I would assume so.
I mean, given the description that these people have of this apparition, even though they were drunk, but not drunk enough to not tell a story.
Right.
And then double checked by people who were believable.
Right.
But them both being so scared that they could barely even get the story out.
For days.
On a Thursday.
Quietly.
You're welcome. I could not find anything else related to this tunnel, specifically to, like, as far as, like, an old articles and stuff.
Right.
Stuff that I found about the book that he wrote and his confession.
Yeah.
That came from a different article.
Well, I would like to find that book.
The original was a short pamphlet, often reprinted, was from 1978 and is 43 pages long.
Oh.
You can find it on Google Books. But if you ever wondered why Hempfield Tunnel is haunted, number one, we don't build on, through, or around,
under
cemetery. Yeah.
That's the first
Cemetery.
for me on under one. That's absurd. Like, what did you think was going to happen?
How old was the cemetery? And we know that burial practices were different then, and so it was a pine box.
Right.
So how many bodies fell through while they were, because they do be sinking.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, it's haunted because of Ulrich. He was murdered by his friend. Now that you've had a horrible break from Bambi's really cool story to hear my stupid story.
You want to learn some random witch trial facts? All right. So for this segment, I am going to just talk about some other facts surrounding the trials. So I will start with, contrary to popular belief, no one was ever burned at the stake in the American colonies. That was a practice primarily found in Europe. In Salem alone, 19 were executed by hanging on Gallows Hill, 14 women and 5 men. One man, 81-year-old Giles Corey, was pressed to death by heavy stones over 2 days because he refused to enter a plea. So we had 0 stake burnings here. other colonial executions from 1647 to 1691. Before the Salem hysteria, there were dozens of other trials and executions, primarily in Connecticut and Massachusetts. In Connecticut, this colony actually held the first recorded witch execution of the Americas. Alcee, or Alice Young, was hanged in Hartford in 1647. In total, Connecticut executed approximately 11 to 16 people for witchcraft. In pre-Salem, Massachusetts, outside of the 1692 events, Massachusetts executed about 6 to 8 others between 1648 and 1688, including the famous case of Goody Glover. So that's outside of Salem. At least 5 people died in the cramped, unsanitary jails while awaiting trial. Some of the crazy things: 2 infants died in prison during the hysteria. One was the newborn daughter of Sarah Good. Her name was Mercy. And the other was the infant son of Elizabeth Proctor. I'm going to tell you some more about that. So the hysteria spared literally no one, regardless of age. Dorothy, or Dorcas Good, was 4 years old. She was jailed for months and suffered lifelong mental trauma. The 4-year-old was interrogated and confessed to having a familiar, which was a snake, that bit her. She was kept in chains in prison for nearly 9 months. Her mother, Sarah Good, was one of the first to be hanged. That's the youngest that was ever actually jailed or accused. She made it. But Mercy, that was her sister.
In regards to like women going to jail and their children having to go because, okay.
Right. Yeah.
There's no one else to care for that. Okay. I didn't know if you were.
Here's the thing, like when Sarah was jailed, of course, Dorothy had to go with her. But the thing is, she was actually accused also. So she was actually arrested and interrogated and all that. She actually was pregnant when she was arrested. Sarah was. So,
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, she gave birth in the jail. And Elizabeth Proctor also was pregnant at the time that she was arrested.
Can you imagine one of the kids in my class being interrogated?
Right.
Because
that's
they're
the thing.
accused of
She was
witchery.
interrogated until she confessed to having a familiar, which, of course, no 4-year-old would even know what the hell that means. So,
right.
She's like, sure, I have a snake. It bit me once.
Which probably a pet snake would be an odd thing for a 4-year-old little girl to have.
Especially back then.
But does she even really have it?
Right. We have, on the other end of the spectrum, we have Mary Bradbury, who was 77 years old. She was convicted and sentenced to hang, but escaped execution. George Jacobs Sr. was 80 years old. He was hanged on August 19th, 1692. And Giles Corey was the oldest, who was 81 years old when he was pressed to death by heavy stones over 2 days because he refused to enter a plea. So that's kind of the age gap in all of them. And remember, this is just for the U.S., and some of these were from Salem, so I still included those in the facts. So I also have some other facts. These are some descendants of the accused or executed in the U.S. trials. Benedict Cumberbatch was descended from John Alden, who escaped. Ralph Waldo Emerson, Ray Bradbury, Alan Shepard, Christopher Reeve, and Linda Hamilton all descended from Mary Bradbury, who escaped. And then Walt Disney descended from George Burroughs, who was executed. Clara Barton was descended from Sarah Cloyce, who was accused. She was the sister of Rebecca Nurse. Norman Rockwell and Sarah Jessica Parker descended from Esther Elwell, who was accused.
How fun that Sarah Jessica Parker, who played one of the Sanderson sisters, is descended from an accused witch.
I agree. William Howard Taft, Grace Coolidge, and Kira Sedgwick was descended from George Jacobs, who was executed. Chester Arthur, Burl Ives, Dick Cheney, and Mickey Rourke descended from Susanna Martin, who was executed. Vince Price, Mitt Romney, and Amy Grant were all descended from Rebecca Nurse, who was executed.
What a
Wild
wild
variety.
just little mix right there. Yeah, we go. That's the word.
Yeah, I know.
Interesting.
Humphrey Bogart was descended from Anne Pudater, who was executed. Claire Danes descended from Margaret Scott, who was executed. Millard Fillmore, Richard Gere, and Lucille Ball descended from Rachel Vinson, who was accused. Scott Foley was descended from Samuel Wardwell, who was accused. That's it for those. We will have more interesting facts in place of my second segment for all of these episodes. But yeah, there's a lot of really cool little things, which, I like to
that.
share.
That's fun.
Me too. All right, so now we're going to let you be Debbie Downer.
It's from 1926.
Yeah.
So this is Marvin Alvin Clark, and this is considered to be the oldest active missing person case in the U.S. Now, if you recall, I have reported on a much older missing person case. So Clark's date of disappearance was listed as October 30th, 1926. But if you recall, I covered the case of the missing perfume heiress, Dorothy Arnold, and her date of disappearance is listed as December 12th, 1910. Now, technically, she is still missing, but she was declared dead in absentia. Being declared dead in absentia closed her case. Clark's case has never been closed, and he has never been declared legally dead, so therefore his case is still an open investigation. Marvin Alvin Clark was born around 1852 in Marion County, Iowa, to George and Mary Clark. Now, the name Mary comes up again later, and it's a different Mary, so kind of have to follow. George and Mary were from New York. We're going to fast forward really far to 1926, when Marvin is now 74 years old. He is a farmer, and he lives in Tigard, Oregon, with his wife, Mary. The couple had previously lived in Nebraska, where Marvin had been a city marshal. His granddaughter, Dorothy Willoughby, said that he had also been the town marshal in Linton, Oregon. And this granddaughter is going to come back into the story a little bit later on. Marvin and Mary had 4 children. Their daughter, Sydney McDougal, had recently moved from Seattle, Washington to Portland and was working as a hotel manager. She moved close to her brother, Grover C. Clark, who, from what I can find, might have been a chiropractor, and he was already living in Portland for some time before Sydney moved near him. On Saturday, October 30th, 1926, the day before Halloween, Marvin left Tigard to visit Sydney in Portland. Now, this is a 10-mile trip. He intended to travel by motor stage, which is what the early bus service was called. He had reportedly not told his daughter that he would be visiting her. He had also not taken a coat. Now, that would seem unusual because it's fall, but as I am a big old nerd, I wanted to check and see what the weather was. And I checked, and it said that on that date, the weather in Portland, Oregon was unseasonably warm, reaching a record high temperature of 92 degrees Fahrenheit, and the sky was described as cloudy. So I was able, after a lot of reading, to find a bit of a description of Marvin, as well as what he was wearing when he left his home. You guys know how I love that so much. 5'7", 175 pounds. His right side paralyzed. He drags his foot when he walks. Now, this for me indicates that he might have had a stroke at some point, but I didn't look for information to determine this. One assumes.
Yeah.
And he was wearing a dark suit with no overcoat. Marvin never made it to Sydney's house. What I can't say with certainty is that he was never seen or heard from again. So I'm going to explain. On November 9th, 1926, so this is how many days later? Like 10 days later. The Bellingham Herald in Bellingham, Washington, printed an article titled, "Aged Man Missing. Relatives Trace Him from Oregon to Bellingham." According to this article, Glover Clark's wife received a disconnected letter postmarked Bellingham from his father. The letter was badly jumbled, despite the fact that Clark is highly educated. The article also says it was learned that he had stopped at hotels here on November 2nd and 3rd. Now, this line confused me because I wasn't able to determine if the letter gave that information or if it was discovered by Grover, because he went to Bellingham after his wife received the letter. So I'm not sure where that piece of information came from.
Yeah.
Police and family searched for Marvin, and a reward of $100 was offered. Now, today, that would be about $1,830. He wasn't found at this point, and I can say his family never heard from him again after that letter. I don't feel confident in saying that he wasn't seen again because I feel like someone saw him somewhere,
Yeah.
like the second and third, right?
That's what I was going to say. Somebody had to have seen him or they wouldn't have known he was at a hotel.
Correct. And he'd already had a history of having a stroke, we assume.
Obviously, yeah.
And probably assumed correctly.
Right.
So for him to have a jumbled letter, it also said that he had degrees from 2 universities. So, he's highly educated. He knows how to pen a letter.
Right.
On Saturday, May 10th, 1986, 59 and a half years after Marvin initially went missing, loggers found a nearly complete skeleton, a corroded revolver, a spent bullet. One thing I read said 32 caliber bullet, and then another one said something else. But regardless, a spent bullet was found, along with some coins and other items, in a ravine in a wooded area near Linton. And the skull had a single bullet hole through the temples. The clothing and items found near the skull appeared to be from the 1920s. This death was ruled a suicide, and the medical examiner guessed the age of the man to be between 35 and 55. Now, remember, he was 74-ish whenever he went missing. A few days after the discovery, his granddaughter, Dorothy Willoughby, who I mentioned earlier, claimed that the body might belong to her missing grandfather. She claimed that he was depressed over medical problems and thought he may have chosen to end his life there, as he had once been the marshal in that town. Dorothy died in 1991, not knowing if she was correct, as they were never able to verify her theory. So as far as theories surrounding Marvin's disappearance, we have, because of the letter that his daughter-in-law received, that he somehow became disoriented, probably from a medical issue, when he was traveling to visit his daughter Sydney and ended up somewhere else entirely. The second theory was the one from his granddaughter, who thought he may have committed suicide due to depression brought about by his medical issues. But given the age, remember the medical examiner said 35 to 55. But then again, that was 1980-something, so
86.
Another idea, which came from family at the time of his disappearance, is that he might have met with foul play while he was traveling. Now, if that was the case, it could have been for 2 reasons. One, he had been a marshal in a couple of different places, and he had surely made some enemies in that profession. So that kind of makes sense. Or he just met with foul play in general that had nothing to do with the fact that he had served as a marshal. So in 2011, after discovering the file about Marvin Clark and realizing the unidentified remains were still in storage, Dr. Nikki Vance of the Oregon State Medical Examiner's Office sent a DNA sample from the remains of the man found in May of '86 to the Center for Human Identification at the University of North Texas. From the DNA profile, volunteer genealogists were able to find 3 great-great-grandchildren on the paternal side. So after this, a request was put out for maternal descendants of Marvin, because they would need maternal DNA to make a positive identification.
Yeah, to verify.
In 2018, Pam Knowles, a great-great-granddaughter of Marvin, and her son provided DNA samples to determine whether or not the remains were actually Marvin Clark. The samples determined the remains were, in fact, not Marvin Clark, but they are still on file for future comparison.
Well, Muses, I think that's going to be it for this round. If you would like to know more about the non-Salem trials in the U.S., please tune in next week. If you have your own macabre musings or burning questions, suggestions, or just need a new perspective, please reach out to us on Facebook or shoot us an email at Macabre.Musings.Podcast@gmail.com. And in the meantime, if you liked this episode, tell a friend. If you didn't, please don't testify against us in court.
Don't do that. Pull up a chair next time as we dive into more dark, creepy lore and maybe tumble down a rabbit hole or two. Until next time, Keep your lanterns low and your curiosities high.
And we will see y'all later.